My name is Lejla.
My name is Erica.
My name's Jade.
My name is Nida.
My name's Ebony.
I
I'm
am
a survivor of domestic abuse. Today I'm breaking my silence.
So, the next question is, why do we have to be dead before we're heard? And when I think about this question, I think about my experience coming forward to the police. Firstly, being encouraged by them. Unrelated incidents has led to that moment where they contacted me, told me they're ready to support me, and they're ready to listen to me. And hearing that from the first time from an authority figure gave me so much hope that I can get out of this, I can get justice, I can get help, and help out of everything is what I wanted the most. So I've gone in. Firstly, it wasn't very welcoming. They initially tried to kick everyone out because they said it was locked down. I understand that there was rules and stuff behind that in terms of being outside. But when we're talking about domestic abuse, I think that's very important and quite urgent anyways, and a good enough reason for me to leave my house. But initially they weren't trying to even hear it. And one of the officers, I remember, he looked at me and I looked absolutely miserable, because for me to even step out of my house, prepared to tell my story for the first time to someone that doesn't really know me, it was a lot. It took a lot. So to get there and to be turned away within 5 minutes, it felt like a bit of a kick to the stomach. He saw me and called me back in and asked me why I came, and I told him briefly, and I said I'm ready to share my story. And I went, I sat down, 5 hours it took to explain everything. And because there's a whole process on reporting, you have to repeat this story many times. And you can imagine how overwhelming that became for me. After that moment, I went home and I just sat there and I felt some sort of relief. Like a weight was lifted off my shoulder, and I thought, wow, I am finally going to be heard. I'm finally going to get justice. I'm finally going to get that help. Shortly after, a couple months went by when it comes to physical assault. I didn't hear anything, no updates. I kept calling, nothing, absolutely nothing from them. They kept saying to me, oh yes, we'll get back to you, nothing. One day in September last year, finally got a call back, a new investigating officer. She says, we want to just get to the bottom of this, get this sorted. She got back to me the next day, 24 hours later. Sorry, we can't investigate. I said, why? And they said, common assault. What's common assault? I've never heard of that in my life. Even when sharing my story, it was never brought up once. So I was very confused in that moment. And in fact, I thought she was just trying to like a quick dismissal, like, we don't want to do this. We don't think it's going to go anywhere. And in that moment, I felt alone. I felt like my time was wasted. And it was actually in that moment where I felt, I'd say for the first time, completely broken. For them to make all these promises, being told that they're here to listen to me, to support me, and then suddenly 5 months later, after hearing nothing, there's nothing they can do for me. I was thinking, the first thing I thought was, how many other people has this happened to, where they've reached out for help, maybe after months, years, however long, to take that courage to the police station with trust in your heart that they are going to get that help and support, and then basically to be left for dust. I tried to call them the next day, went straight to voicemail, and I never heard from them ever again. Not a single police officer ever contacted me ever again. They refused to look at the evidence. They refused to speak to witnesses. They refused to look into medical history because I had to have a trip to the hospital. None of that happened. And I remember calling my sister and I called my friends and I said, there's something I need to do about this because I know I'm not the only one. There's no way. And I almost became obsessive. I started searching on the internet, 12, 15 tabs open, reading the law, Magistrates Courts Act, this act, that act. I read pages and pages and pages, hours and hours and hours, no sleep. And I thought, there are so many people who are coming forward, breaking you know, down their barriers essentially, because you're opening a door of pain, trauma that you've probably not shared with most people. My family didn't know at this point. They had absolutely no clue that anything has ever happened to me. I would come into my house with a smile on my face no matter what's happened. And then it makes me wonder, what has to happen to me before they actually listen to me? What lengths does an abuser have to go to before they take me seriously? And I remember reading these stories. I remember going on Instagram, seeing these small accounts, because I wasn't familiar with this world of, you know, this community essentially. I was not familiar with it. I always kept it to myself. And seeing people saying that their cases went nowhere and time limits, this limit, I was like, what? Like, how does this even exist? And that's when I created my campaign, Victims 2, 5 days after both investigations were closed, because there was 2 different charges that was being investigated. Both of them was closed on the same day. I started Victims 2, and that was my journey to finding peace on my own, because they didn't refer me for any help, no support. I had to go to the doctors and say, I need therapy because I've not slept properly in 6 months. And I'm still doing it till this day, and I'm still finding my feet. But there are so many women out there in the world who feel like they're completely by themselves, who have gone forward and been turned away with no support, nothing.
Yeah, and I think just the fact that, just how much bravery it takes to even go to the police, to even tell them what's happening to you, and then to give hours and hours of statements, and then for them to turn around and be like, no, sorry, you've passed the statute of limitations. What? And the fact that you can't even get a conviction for domestic violence.
Exactly.
Like, that's not a thing.
It's not even possible. I remember asking them, can't you at least charge him for this? Because I can prove that. They're like, no, it's UK law, you can't charge someone for that. I was like, what? Checked it and it was true. No one's ever been charged for domestic abuse specifically, or domestic violence. It's not that. That's why it gets categorized into things like common assault, which equates like a pub fight or, you know, throwing a drink at someone. Yeah, I'm telling you for 3 years that someone's been beating, punching me, and you're telling me by the law it's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's very damaging, like the message that it gives to people. And you can imagine me starting a campaign and telling people this is the reality of the law in this country for you and your protection. Why would anyone want to come forward hearing that?
Absolutely.
It's a scary reality, and that's why, you know, it's almost a year now since I've started Victims 2, and to me it still feels like the beginning, because there's so much that needs to be done to change how things are working in this country, to increase the safety of people in this country.
What would your ideal outcome be for the campaign?
I initially went all in. I wanted the complete abolishment of that 6-month limit, because I think it's completely ridiculous. The fact that these 6 months as well, especially if people do come forward within this time, it's out of their control the moment they've told the police, because then the police also have the same 6 months to get it, to get a charge and to take it to court. So how can you put a time limit on someone's healing journey, their process of accepting what's even happened to them, being safe? Because that's the most important thing, I think, when it comes to reporting. I always say to them, as long as you're safe, that's the most important thing. If you don't feel safe, don't report it yet. Find safety first, because when you report it, it's not like the police are going to come and take your abuser overnight. Especially if you live with them, you're going back into that house, you're going back into that environment, especially if you have children. What happens then? Because they're not going to do all those things overnight.
No, absolutely. And I think the risk of those type of situations ending up in domestic abuse, homicide, only escalates even more, because you're actually involving authorities at that point as well, which is only going to anger the abuser.
Yeah, because they feel threatened now.
Yeah, and therefore, again, leaving the victim with no safety net, none whatsoever. I have absolutely no experience with the courts, and as we know, most victims don't make it to the police station to report their abuser, and then the ones that do very rarely get a conviction anyway.
After I, like for me, after I made the decision, obviously, that I was going to leave, I knew I was going. I didn't have any form of plan at all. I had nowhere to go. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I hadn't really told many people at that point. And I had one friend who I started spending a lot of time with, and he hated every single moment of that. And then in the March 2019, I'd gone, I can't remember where we went, but I went out with my friend and we took all the children and stuff. I arrived home at like 6 o'clock that night. He'd been like ringing off my phone all day, going absolutely mental, and just said to me like, wait until you see when you get back. So I was like, okay, like just left it, didn't say anything to my friend. Went home. Within minutes, he was literally like trying to kick off my front door. My son was there, my daughter, and I was literally praying the door did not come through, because I thought if he comes through that door now, he is going to kill me. And I was crying, but I still didn't want to call the police at that point. He left my house, like he'd got back into the car, he'd sped off, and my friend called me within 10 minutes, and I could hear him screaming, and he was like, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill your son. He was like, where is she? Like, he was going absolutely mental, and I was screaming at her. I was like, don't you dare call the police, because I was so scared of like the police getting involved, because I just felt like where I'd witnessed him get away with so much, I thought, I'm actually going to die, like I don't want any involvement. So she agreed. She called me back within minutes, and he was still there. He'd managed to get through the bottom of her security door, and her son was being sick in the corner, and he was crying. He was like, oh my God, like Nalea's dad is going to kill us, basically. So I had no choice but to call the police. So yeah, we called the police. He'd driven off and gone God knows where at this point. They came out and said to us, like, is there a safe place we can go to? So we went to another house. We was there until like 6 o'clock the next morning. Like, they were taking statements, they were listening to like voice notes on my phone. And then, yeah, they just said to us to stay where we was, and they were going to go and look for him. He'd then discovered that obviously the police were looking for him at this point, because they'd been to his parents' home, etc. And he completely lost the plot. He got arrested, and they released him on bail, just with conditions not to contact us directly or indirectly. It didn't stop him. He kept coming back to the house. He just kept coming back. He literally, like, it was at its worst. The police arrested him again for like the third time, and in the end I was like to my friend, like, he's actually going to kill me this time. So we literally packed all of our stuff and we went to Turkey. We literally like went, and I just said to her, like, I can't even come back, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Whilst we were there, the police were just like, oh, we're working on it, we're like building a case, etc. But nothing was offered to me in the meantime. And I think after about 2 weeks in Turkey, they contacted me and just said, is there anyone that could let them into my home, because they wanted to put like fire safety procedures in there and alarms, etc. We came back. When I landed back from Turkey, went back to the house, and he'd put through every single window and door to my house. Everything was smashed. Even though I had deterrents in there and stuff, it didn't stop him. There was a warrant out again for his arrest. There was a brick in there, and they were basically saying he had an alibi as to where he was, but the police were really good, and they were really pushing, and they were like, it has to have been this man, like it has to have been. So they did forensics on a brick, which they said they never normally do, but they were so adamant they wanted to get him. Obviously it came back, it was him, so he was further arrested. He kept getting released on bail. They were just like, we have nothing to hold this guy on. And then it got to like the 11th time was when I was walking to my mum's house, because at this point I just couldn't bear to be in the house. I'd been given a panic alarm, which once you press, like, the police have like 2 minutes to attend a scene. It's a rapid response unit. And yeah, I was walking to my mum's, and I was pushing my daughter in the pram at the time. My son luckily wasn't there. And yeah, he literally got out of his car. He must have followed me from where I was, because he was already parked in the car park, but I was completely oblivious because he was banned from the area, so I didn't even I still have my wits about me, but it's such a secluded area that you just don't think anything of it. And yeah, he jumped out of the car, he grabbed me, my daughter rolled down the hill in her pram. He was like, literally, I was screaming. He'd literally dragged me through the passenger side of the window, so my legs were like dangling out the side. Not one person came out into the street. My mum could obviously hear the commotion. She came running down. She ran straight past my daughter because she was screaming, like, what is going on? And she actually had a knife in her hand at this point because she literally, where he'd been arrested so many times, she couldn't sleep because she was like, he's going to kill my daughter. He had let go of me, and the first thing I did, I grabbed my phone out of my pocket, like I got up off the floor, grabbed my phone, because in my head, I didn't even have time to process what happened. I just knew I needed to get a recording of this man in his car, because my thing was like, the police have to do something now. So I did, got a recording, and I was just in such a state. My mum had gone back, pressed the panic alarm, the rapid response came. And yeah, they literally didn't even take a statement from me at that point. They looked at the state of me and they were like, we're going to go and get him. When they found him, he had the same balaclava on that he had, and he was just so casually sitting there rolling drugs, and he was like, what now? He did not care in the slightest, and thankfully on this point the CPS made the decision to remand him, because they said if we let him go now, he's going to kill her. So he was remanded until court, like the following morning, where he was remanded to prison. We was given a trial date. In the build up to that, social services did contact me over a period of time, because each time you make a domestic abuse report, it straight away it gets obviously sent to them, and they have to do a safeguarding. They came out, they literally looked in my fridge, I had a look around my house and was like, this is a really nice house. They were like, you're doing really well, like, well done. They were like, just don't contact him again. That was all they said to me. That was literally it. And then when he was then officially remanded in prison, they came back and just said, yeah, and obviously if you do have any contact with him, then we will do a child protection basically, and we would have to take your children. And I was like, right. And that was it. Nothing more was said. For the court process, so he went not guilty on all charges. He pleaded guilty to possession of a Class A and a Class B substance, because obviously when he was arrested he was found with cocaine and cannabis. So he pleaded guilty to those, but pleaded not guilty to everything else. They then degraded the charges, so it was a case of common assault, there was ABH, common assault, criminal damage, battery, harassment, stalking, and he went not guilty to all of those. So I had to obviously attend a trial. So on the build up, they told me like I could go. I had a look around, and they do give you the option. They said like you can have a curtain where he would be behind the curtain and you wouldn't see him, and he wouldn't be allowed to speak. It would simply be his solicitor. But by that point, I just thought, I've come this far, like I don't want him to think I'm scared of him anymore, because I don't want him to feel like he has that control over me. So I was like, I don't want the curtain. So the day of court came, I went in, and obviously my mum couldn't come in because she was a witness on a couple of the events, so she wasn't allowed in at all. And yeah, literally had to obviously say my piece. He sat behind the glass swearing in handcuffs. He didn't care at all. The judge was amazing, because they actually specify in domestic abuse, like in these cases, that's like their forte. So she already knew what sort of person he was, and she was a brilliant. However, his solicitor was like, at first he was really grilling me, and he literally like played it all as if I was this crazy jealous girl that's provoked this man to do all these things to me. And yeah, like it was only then when the evidence started, like the prosecutor, who's obviously on your side, was bringing up all the evidence and stuff, and kept saying to his solicitor, is there anything you'd like to say? And in the end, he sat down and he just said that there was nothing more he needed to say on the matter. Then as it was getting towards the end of my testifying, he said that he shouted out to the judge that he wanted to speak to his solicitor in private. So he was allowed that. Like, I don't know how they have so much rights, but he did. He was allowed to do that. And they called us back in, and they were just like, he's changed his plea, he's pleading guilty, do you want to come in and watch sentencing? And yeah.
They made you further victimised.
Yeah, before he changed his plea. Like, he put me through that.
Traumatise yourself.
Yeah, literally, to relive that and be absolutely grilled with my children in the witness protection room as well, with a court, because obviously all my family was there with me. I had no one to have them. And yeah, he changed his plea, and his sentence was so poor. Like, he got a year, and his time on remand came off. Everything came off of his sentence. But in that moment, I was just so relieved he wasn't leaving the courtroom with me, and I was so happy that on paper it was going to be evidential that he actually done those things, because I was so scared of him walking away from there thinking, like, if he gets not guilty, people are going to think I've lied, that they've made things up. And I was given like an IDVA, which is obviously the Independent Domestic Abuse Advocate. She was really good, but I felt like she had no personal experience. So she was just very textbook in the sense of like, well, now you're away, he's in prison, you can go to a refuge and just start your life all over again and live happily ever after, basically. And I just felt it was really like uncompassionate. Like, I wasn't offered anything at all. My son wasn't offered anything. Like, everything that I've done and gone on to do is because I've found it off of my own back, basically. So yeah.
So that really the support for you was pretty poor.
It's poor. It's really, really poor. I think it's just the fact that you'll just then have to get up and still be a mum. Every day of these days you have to go through this and still be a mum and still do all these things, and there's just nothing for you. Like,
still so much shame attached to being a victim as a woman of domestic abuse, because it's always the mum that's told, well, if you go near the perpetrator abuser, we're going to put your child on a protection plan,
you're being punished.
and you're going to lose your children. It's like, well,
Literally.
hang on, what's happening to him?
Yeah.
Literally, like
I'm sick to the back teeth of that, because Jade, you've had some experience with social services,
Yeah,
haven't you?
I had different experiences. Luckily for me and the kids, it ended really well. But the first woman that I had, oh my goodness, she just installed the fear of death into me. She just had no boundaries, no level of professionalism, just outright told me that if I don't do exactly what she recommends, that this is going to be, you know, probably what's going to happen. My son was going to be removed. Even though I was in a refuge at that point, she just wouldn't say when she was coming. She'd just show up, knocking on the door, you know, expecting me to be available, really treated me like I'd really done something wrong. When I was in a refuge, you know, my key worker in there was saying, you're doing everything that you can to protect your son, well done, you're doing a really great job. For then somebody who has a statutory responsibility to obviously safeguard my son, you know, I didn't want her to be involved, but knew that she would have to be. And I think also a lot of people don't realise that if your child is under a child in need plan, you do not have to engage with social services. It is only if they are on a child protection plan that it's statutory. And I think a lot of women get scared into thinking, oh, I must comply because then I won't look like a good mum. Actually, nobody knows your situation and your children better than you do. And if that person, if that social worker is doing more harm than good to your mental health, or how they're showing up for you, how they're advocating for your child, you can request somebody else. You can absolutely go and say to their manager, to their team lead, whoever the case may be, which is what I did with the first person that was supporting my son. It took so many times for her to barge herself in and tell me this, that and the other. I'd had enough. I was at my wit's end. I said, I need to speak to your manager. I had the support from Refuge, which was invaluable at that time, and I made the appointment with her manager. She profusely apologised, said that she was not working within her code of conduct, that they didn't support any of what she'd been doing. She'd happily come in and out of Refuge telling me that my abuser was really nice, that she didn't see the issue with him, that he's got a really nice family, that they're really nice, and that you know, what she doesn't really understand why I'm in here. She said that she was playing, in her words, Mrs. Marple, and even to this day I don't really know what that means, because I was just so traumatised by how she was behaving that she ended up I think being sacked, or she left, I'm not sure, but her boss reassured me that she wasn't going to work for them anymore, that I didn't have to worry, I'll be reassigned somebody else. But my whole journey in that borough, because I changed counties when I moved from Refuge, the other social services team, my goodness, just worlds apart. I had so much support. She was the kind of woman who I could ring her at a time she shouldn't be on her work phone, and I would get some kind of response. And people like that are so rare. You know, it's like you've struck gold when you get a social worker that really is a social worker, that will do anything for you and your children, that wants you to stay together, that will support you however best is for your family. And I honestly, part of me just died when I had to be signed off from her. That was how much I got on with her. And she just got me through such a hard time. But not everybody has that experience, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I know from all the thousands of women that message me daily on my page, their experiences with agencies are awful. They're re-traumatized, re-victimized, that they are made to feel embarrassed, ashamed of what they've been through. And I think it's just important that everyone's stories are heard, that they're as honest as possible, whatever you experience, whether it was positive or negative, because the whole point is to make these changes so that victims don't go through this again, that they are supported and that they're able to leave safely. Because I know, Nida, you have a lifetime restraining order against your abuser, don't you?
It's indefinite. My kids went straight onto the child protection register just because of how severe the incidents were. I mean, the man put bleach in my eyes whilst I was asleep, and the kids were sleeping next to me. Poured boiling water over my foot, burnt me with an iron, and I have to live with them scars for life. To the fact that I can't even bleach, I can't iron, because it triggers. And people don't understand that. They don't understand it. We were supposed to go to trial because he pleaded not guilty to everything. We were getting ready for court and everything, and literally 7 days before, he pleaded guilty to everything. He got charged with GBH, ABH, child neglect, and he got 16 years.
And he's still serving the sentence now?
He got released, but he's not allowed anywhere near us. He's not allowed in certain boroughs of the council because of where I work, where the kids go to school. Yeah.
So it just goes back to Erica's point of the whole campaign, is how important it is to be able to report your abuser and the abuse that you have experienced at any time. Something has to change, the way that we are allowed to keep evidence, or the evidence we are allowed to give, because I never took pictures at the time of my injuries,
No.
never.
No.
I mean, I'm scarred on my arm and that will stay for life now from one of the attacks. But I never took pictures.
I didn't.
No.
And so what, because I didn't have that evidence, I could never go to the police and press any kind of charges.
I didn't really have much image photos from the past other than when I had a broken nose, but that was because it gave me 2 black eyes underneath, like my nose. But most of mine was like actual WhatsApp voice notes, like of him talking, and there was things in there of him admitting to sexual abuse and literally everything, and they couldn't use it because they said it was wasn't within the time limit. So they said it's okay, like we'll do a historical statement. So they made me sit for hours. They took our phones and downloaded like everything from both of our phones. And yeah, the domestic, the DASU team, which is the domestic abuse investigation unit, they just couldn't stop apologising to me because they said like it's all there in black and white for them to hear, for them to see, and they couldn't do anything about it. The only charges that they could go on was the things that had been in those months, which is majority of the time was after I'd left.
And essentially, there wasn't even a conviction for attempted kidnap.
No, it got reduced to common assault because he'd bruised my wrists and my legs where they'd dragged across the floor, had grazes. So they had the images that they have their own obviously little iPads that they take the images and stuff. And I went down to the station, and it's like so degrading. Like I'm in a cell, like they're taking my clothes off, like taking pictures and stuff of all the different things, and then they're just like, yeah, it was common assault. And then they swabbed my face, because where he'd spat so much at me when he dragged me into the car and he was spitting on my face, they were so adamant, the police, on like they wanted to just prove that this was this man, and like, because they said like their hands are tied, like the police get really stressed, and they swabbed my face for like the DNA and things like that. But yeah, it was common assault, even for the fact that my child had rolled down a hill in a pram. Like, there was nothing. He smashed a car window over her head, and even when the police came on their body cam footage that they showed in court, one of the officers had my daughter upside down by her legs whilst my mum was shaking her head to get the glass out and stuff, and he was charged with nothing for that other than criminal damage for the window. No assault or anything on my child.
But that's why it's so frustrating. It's because even though the police, yes, they are stretched, yes, the funding is difficult, but even when they are presented with evidence, they can't use it, and it's a big question. Well, why? And you've got all of these clinical psychologists that go on, and Laura Richards, for example, who made the 7 stages of homicide, of how women end up dead, and there's all these high risk factors that come into it, and it just seems though when women do die, ultimately there's a paper trace of how this all happened, and all of this information is readily available on systems, on police databases. You can easily, a police officer could go and find it all, social services, and it's like, point at the agency who failed this person. Actually, no, collectively all of you did, and it's pointing the finger back at the abusive person and making them take accountability, which no agency really seems to do, even the police.
It's always now about like, you have to prove that what happened to you rather than them proving that they didn't do it. And I think that was a massive thing for like me, because I just feel like I'm going to these extremes whilst someone is abusing me, whilst being a mum and
being traumatized.
And he's just freely like, it's whatever, like, and I think that's really, really hard.
I think the terms domestic abuse, homicide as well, it needs to be used more often, because that term domestic abuse, homicide means that it could have been stopped and prevented at any point of the cycle. And yet, because the agencies and the systems fail victims, we end up dead.
It is just like, it is really, really bizarre. Like, on my restraining order, it's the same as yours, Nita. It's just it's just until further notice. And it says that it carries 5 years at the bottom. And he was doing drive-bys of my house in his car, but because he had his face covered, because obviously it was height of COVID, he was wearing a mask, he said it wasn't him driving the car. So even when they downloaded the images from like the ANPR camera on a roundabout and stuff, they were like, we couldn't prove it was him. Like, just couldn't prove. So meanwhile, he's terrorising like my son, because he would do it during like school run hours and stuff. So he knew that like my son would be outside, and there was just nothing. It's literally down to what you can prove.
I really hope, honestly, that by everyone hearing your stories, why you started your campaign, having a lifetime restraining order, everything that you experienced with social services, that a change has to happen for victims to be safely enabled to leave and give proper evidence and get the proper justice that they all deserve.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
I just feel like, because there isn't actually a prison sentence that someone could get that would make anyone feel any better about what happened to them. Like, so many, like my family was so angry about his sentencing, and I just said it doesn't matter whether he got a year or whether he got 30, it wouldn't change for me, because he done what he done, and I have to live with that. At the end of his sentence, he gets to walk out and he gets to be free, regardless. Whatever his idea of being free is what he gets to do. Like, meanwhile we're still learning like how to live and rebuild your lives and different things. So.
And we still are silenced regardless of what we do, because for those of us that don't have convictions, which I think is us three, right? There's not even much we can do. Can't publicly out them, can't prove it as such. And then what happens to victims like us? What does that mean for us? That our stories just never existed.
And that's why so many girls will struggle to speak out, because it's like, if there is no end result of like a conviction or anything, what is the point? Because for me, like, it took 11 arrests for the police to protect me and do something. I wasn't offered anything in those times. They were literally releasing him on bail, and most of them times they wouldn't call me until hours after he'd left the station. Like, they would ring me in the afternoon to say, oh, he was released at 9 a.m. this morning on bail, blah, 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 blah. And it was just like, here we go again. Like,
It's really
literally
negligent of
yeah.
the police. There's no informed choice with the
No.
police. They have a legal duty to inform you if they've been, I can't remember which law it is now, it may be Kay's law, it's only recently came about, but if someone has attacked you or there's any domestic incident, if they've been put on bail, they have to contact you, because there's been so many times somebody has gone on bail and gone and killed
someone, yeah.
their partner, their ex-partner. There's so much evidence that is something that happens, that's had to come about, and it's just devastating. It could be completely avoided.
And even though we do have, and I think it's really important for victims to know that there is things like Claire's Law, where you can do a background check with the police if you fear that your partner has had some kind of abusive or violent past, but they're not always convicted. So then what do we do?
No, I had no idea, like, regarding Claire's Law and stuff. I had no idea, and it was only after I'd called the police a couple of times and they'd asked me if I'd ever done one, and I hadn't, and I did, and that's when obviously I saw the extent of the amount of things, like, that he'd actually been arrested for but not actually charged with on so many occasions. And I just thought that is just beyond, like, that someone could repeat this behaviour. Because his ex-partner as well, he'd broken her jaw and stuff, like, a few months prior to when I'd first had him arrested, and he was on bail for that. The domestic abuse unit, they were trying to do, like, the whole coercive control thing to say, like, this is just now a pattern of behaviour, this is now multiple women rather than just one. But she was just unable to take the stand because she was so traumatised from what had happened to her that in the end her case got thrown out because they said she was an unreliable witness because she wouldn't turn up, she would run away, she ended up, like, where she couldn't.
And yet actually they didn't need another witness because all the coercive control was there in your case.
Yeah. Exactly.
So with victims too, I can only hope that, you know, it continues to raise awareness, because even though I've been campaigning for so long, you know, the law change is not guaranteed right now. I can make as much noise as I want, but if the government chooses not to listen, then what the most I can do is let women know that this is what their options are, this is the reality, so they don't have to face what a lot of us have, which is going in, telling your story, having to literally relive those moments, that trauma, that pain, and then being told you're too late. I can only hope this law changes, and with victims too, and with the community growing so much and the connections I've been able to make with amazing women, I can only hope that some change does come out of this.